What's up, everybody? Nick Whalen, Jeff Erickson here from RotoWire. We're talking sneaky waiver wire ads for Week 14 of the NFL season. Coming off of a Week 13, Jeff, in which all 32 teams were active. Not the case this week. We got our final round of bye weeks, so we will be without the Broncos, the Colts, the Patriots, the Commanders, and the two big ones, the Baltimore Ravens and the Houston Texans. As always, we'll go position by position. We'll help you find some value, help you find some fill-ins if you got guys on bye this week. We'll start at the quarterback position. Jeff, I want to mention the same guy that we've mentioned every week for a month now. I know Russell Wilson, his roster rate is up to like 40% in ESPN leagues. He should absolutely be rostered at this point. It's not always going to be the Cincinnati defense on the other side, but I continue to be really impressed by Russell Wilson. So if he's out there, even if you're not going to start him, just pick him up. You don't want somebody else putting him on their roster. Right. But if we get into some truly sneaky ads at the quarterback position, who do you like this week?
In that vein of, hey, let's pick on the Cincinnati defense. Cooper Rush is eminently available. And you're not going to get monster numbers from him, but 2 weeks ago he did have pretty big passing yardage numbers. And really, I would start you, Nick, against the Bengals defense right now. And sight unseen, I've never seen you throw. No, not good, but I'd still do it. Because you'd find a way to get there. It's just you got to do it right now. If you're looking for other options there, I would say your guy Matt Jones will probably start this week. And I don't love Mac Jones, but it is he is facing Tennessee, a pretty decent matchup there. The other side of that equation there, I mean, Will Levis is probably available, and if you like the roller coaster. You could get some plus results there. There's been some big yardage games out of Levis. And then finally, again, we're dumpster diving here. It's all ugly. But Aidan O'Connell against Tampa Bay also strikes me as in a matchup where yardage should come.
Yeah, I thought AOC looked about as good as he possibly could have against the Kansas City Chiefs this past week. Should be a better matchup on paper, at least against Tampa Bay. I think our lists are pretty comparable here. I had Cooper Rush as well. You're just targeting the Bengals in that scenario. He's got Brandin Cooks back in the mix now as well. You mentioned Will Levis. Not only does he get the Jags this week, but he gets the Bengals in Week 15. He's quietly been a decent fantasy quarterback of late. Wasn't the case this past week, but Tennessee, for the most part, has been pretty competitive week in and week out for a month plus now. Will Levis, multiple touchdown passes in 3 of his last 4 games. Calvin Ridley's coming alive. He's somehow developed an unlikely connection with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who we'll talk about later in the video. But those are the guys at the top of my list. And we should mention Caleb Williams as well. 26, 27, and 16 fantasy points over his last 3 games. He does go to San Francisco this week, but that's not nearly as intimidating of a matchup as it looked like it would be earlier in the season. Fred Warner, of course, went out late in that game on Sunday night against Buffalo. Chicago's still struggling to run the ball in general. This has had to be more of a pass-heavy offense. And, Caleb has not thrown a pick since week 6. He's given you decent yardage totals, at least 230 yards now in 3 straight games. And the last thing I'll say, he's given you a reasonable rushing floor as well. 70, 33, 39 rushing yards over those last 3 games. Let's move to the running back position, Jeff, where I think both of us probably had to change our notes last minute because as we record this on Monday afternoon, big news out of San Francisco.
Yeah, not so sneaky ad. Empty your wallet ad. Isaac Guerendo is now your starting Niners running back. Not just Christian McCaffrey out with the PCL strain, but Jordan Mason has a high ankle sprain and also is going to IR. Guerendo, I last checked, was 3% rostered in Yahoo leagues. He is going to be available in many, many, many formats there. And it's a rare situation here where you have a clear starter on a team that still can run the ball. You got to go get Guerendo if he's available. Use the most, the most you need to beat the next highest person. If you have the hammer, use it here. If you have waiver priority, use it here. I think that's the point. His back will be Patrick Taylor, back up off the practice squad, most likely.
Yeah, I mean, as of today, he's the only healthy body on that roster. Obviously, having to elevate Taylor from the squad, and CMC's on IR, Jordan Mason's on IR, Elijah Mitchell, who you forget is even on this roster, he's on IR. So this should be Isaac Guerendo's job. Carried 4 times for 19 yards in that Bills game, had a catch as well. Earlier in the season, though, we did get more of a glimpse of him. Went 10 for 99 against Seattle, 14 for 85 and a touchdown against the Dallas Cowboys. This is one of the rare empty the clip type of pickups on this season, especially given where we are in the calendar. I have Kimani Vidal on my list. It's been a while since we've talked about him. Played only 12 snaps this past week against Atlanta, but he did outsnap Hassan Haskins as the number 2 guy behind Gus Edwards. Haskins also lost a fumble earlier in the game. We'll kind of have to wait and see on J.K. Dobbins as far as that goes. But Kimani Vidal touched the ball on 4 of his 12 snaps. Just a weird game overall for the Chargers. They didn't really run many plays. They had under 190 yards of total offense. So I wouldn't read too much into that. But in deeper leagues with all these teams on bye this week, he's somebody that I'll be grabbing as a speculative ad.
Yeah, I don't love the matchup against the Chiefs, but Dobbins is on IR, so it's another one there where you got at least 3 more weeks of that being possible. I've got a list of guys here, Nick. We have plenty of running backs that I think have some value that are less than a third own. Ray Davis on Buffalo, one of my faves, always still happens to be floating out there in about 30% of leagues. Chris Rodriguez, he was batting cleanup for the Commanders against the Titans. They had a huge lead in this one. He cleaned up, but he cleaned up well. He's got some skill. So I think he's going to be, with Austin Eckler on IR, he's got to be worth paying attention to. Yep. Blake Corum had more carries than he usually does. That might be the start of a trend. I hope so. I'd like to see it. I think everybody who's been a partisan of Blake Corum all season long would like to see it. Don't love the matchup against Buffalo, unfortunately. Although you can run against them. Yeah. You're another one of you, and this is another one on the Nick Whalen's greatest hits list, is Kendry Miller for the Saints, eligible to come off IR. Rizzy even said, "I have no doghouse. He's not in my doghouse. I don't even have a dog." So maybe Miller will be that dog. He showed some talent. Mm-hmm. I think with Taysom Hill out, you're going to have to use running backs even more. And against the Giants, that's how you want to beat them anyhow.
Yeah, I like that call quite a bit. I will double down on Corum and Ray Davis. I mean, really, at this point, they're both in the obvious injury handcuff zone, but I hope we see a little bit more of Blake Corum. So I'm working in earlier in games than he typically has this past week against the Saints. I think you could throw both Tyler Allgeier and Zach Charbonnet into that category as well. And Charbonnet played 28 snaps compared to 39 for Kenneth Walker this past week. He only carried 4 times. He did vulture the touchdown for Seattle, so we like that. But Kenneth Walker has now really struggled in 4 of the last 5 games. Another sub 50-yard day for him against the Jets. Now, I don't think it's Kenneth Walker's fault necessarily. I think it's significantly more of an offensive line issue than it is Kenneth Walker, but maybe Seattle does try mixing it up a little bit. Charbonnet's now played 20-plus snaps in back-to-back games for the first time since weeks 7 and 8. So somebody to keep an eye on in deeper leagues. And then I'll also throw out Braelon Allen, somebody we've touched on and off throughout the year. I don't think Breece Hall is going to lose his job. Breece Hall did lose a very key fumble in the second half this past week against Seattle. Again, I don't see this as Braelon Allen, taking that job from him, but we got to be realistic about where the Jets are, right? If they're talking about benching Aaron Rodgers, I think they are in full-on evaluation mode for the rest of the season. So again, that doesn't mean that Breece Hall is just banished for the last 5 weeks of the year, but I could see them working in Braelon Allen a little bit more, trying to fully see what they have in the rookie.
Yeah, getting younger. And it's weird saying that with Breece Hall on the team, but Braelon Allen's really young also. So that could be a case there. Didn't have a whole lot in the wide receiver department. That's the funny thing. A lot of inventory at running back. The guys I thought of at wide receiver, Adam Thielen, we saw really played a big role for the Carolina Panthers in their comeback attempt against Tampa Bay. Still 32% rostered in Yahoo. They're going to do whatever they can to try to make, Bryce Young look good or just try to develop. And that includes having a reliable receiver in Adam Thielen, and a guy that's a good route runner. Maybe not a guy that's fast and big, but he finds a way to get open regardless. Brandin Cooks is off IR. We mentioned attack the Bengals. Well, here's this guy, this fast receiver named Brandin Cooks. He's probably going to have 1 big touchdown. So I think he's a good stream for this week.
Yeah, I think for that specific matchup, no question. He's somebody I'd be picking up. You mentioned Adam Thielen. I mean, he was 3rd on the team in terms of snaps and routes this past week, but still led the Panthers with 10 targets. I mean, made that crazy one-handed grab that should have set them up for what could have been the game-winning field goal. So technically, still playing behind David Moore and Xavier Legette, but I think that could change in the coming weeks as he gets fully ramped up. And, honestly, the improvement of Bryce Young just completely changes things for this passing game. It's like you wanted no part of the Panthers passing game for most of the year, but the way that Bryce Young has continued to improve week to week, all of a sudden I'm interested. I will say, though, tough matchup against Philly this week. I wouldn't feel great about any of those Panthers options. But after that, they get Dallas, Arizona, and Tampa Bay to finish out the fantasy season. So 3 pretty solid matchups there. I'll throw out a few more. I mean, we got to talk about Westbrook-Ikhine, 8 touchdowns in his last 8 games. You probably keep feeling like, I'm going to miss the boat. He can't possibly keep this up. Well, the numbers say that, for the last 7 or 8 weeks, he's been about as consistent as it gets for guys who are low owned. Target volume has not been huge, but he has seen at least 5 targets in 4 of the last 5 games. And again, a really nice schedule coming up for Tennessee: Jacksonville, Cincinnati, Indy, in Jacksonville again, taking them through week 17. In conjunction with Westbrook-Ikhine, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, he led the Saints in both snaps and routes on Sunday. Not a high target player at all. You're just kind of hoping for the one splash play, but it's been there more often than not. And then reluctantly, Parker Washington. He's the Jags' number 2 receiver right now. Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, both on IR. Washington played 59 of 70 offensive snaps for the Jags in that Texans game, was targeted 11 times. That was the most on the team. He didn't do much in the 2 previous games that Mac Jones started, so that worries me a little bit, but somebody to keep an eye on in a desperation situation.
Absolutely. I don't have a whole lot to add about Parker Washington. Sorry.
No, fair enough. Fair enough.
But I did see the production.
Okay, well, let's move to the tight end position. And this was a little tough for me this week, Jeff. I do have Will Dissly still on my list. I'm sticking with Will Dissly. I know he gave you a 0 this past week. I know he was only targeted once, but again, super weird game for the Chargers. Didn't even crack 190 yards of total offense. Only ran 46 offensive plays. I still believe in Will Dissly, and he's got a really good matchup this week against this Kansas City defense that has been leaky against tight ends all year.
Indeed. And tight end's a tough position this week. Bye weeks alone, you've got Mark Andrews, Dalton Schultz, Hunter Henry, and Zach Ertz all on bye. But also, Dallas Goedert got hurt as week to week. Taysom Hill likely out for the season. Theo Johnson out for the season. If you're in a deep league or if you're in a double tight end league like I'm in, it's not pretty. So I'm looking at some of the replacements here. Calcaterra on Philly, Juwan Johnson on the Saints. Those are 2 guys that I might take a shot at there. And the Carolina Panthers suggested Jatavian Sanders might be back from his neck injury against Philly this upcoming week. He was showing some promise before getting hurt. They used Tommy Tremble a lot this past week. I think Sanders goes back to that role if he does play.
Yeah, you mentioned Juwan Johnson. He's on my list. I mean, has not had a great year, but if you look at last season, he was banged up early on. It really came on late in the year. A lot of his production came over the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season. Did have a season-high 7 targets this past week against the Chargers, and I know Taysom Hill plays running back, he plays quarterback, he's on special teams, but he's technically a tight end. And I think having him out of the mix for the rest of the year only improves the outlook for Juwan Johnson. And then you mentioned, some other injured tight ends and some replacements to keep an eye on. Jake Ferguson, he was out this past week with a concussion. If he were to miss another week, I think Luke Schoonmaker becomes viable. You could say the same thing for Dawson Knox if Dalton Kincaid continues to miss time. And then Cole Kmet, still out there in plenty of leagues. I know it's been a disappointing year. I know the target volume has gone up and down on a week-to-week basis. But again, I'm kind of buying in on the improvement for this Bears offense, specifically the Bears passing game and Caleb Williams. And I think the banishment of Matt Eberflus really only improves things the rest of the way for Chicago. So don't mind snagging Cole Kmet. Be realistic, but he's out there in more leagues than he should be.
Indeed. I like that one a lot. It seems like since they did the offensive coordinator change, Kmet has been a lot more viable. Hopefully, he won't give his bigger contribution won't be like canceling good offensive plays for bad picks, because that happened a couple times against the Lions on Thanksgiving Day.
All right, that's going to do it for our Week 14 sneaky ads. All these teams on bye weeks, extra important to make sure you're on top of the waiver wire this week. Let us know in the comments who you're adding, who you're dropping, any sneaky ads you're considering making in your leagues. Always love hearing from you. And please make sure you're subscribed to the RotoWire YouTube channel. You can check us out on the RotoWire channel, the RotoWire Fantasy Football channel, RotoWire Fantasy Basketball. Subscribe to all of them. That way you won't miss any of our content throughout the season. And lastly, go check out rotowire.com/try. That's rotowire.com/TRY. Free access to everything on our site.